I do want to address what is going to be the event of the weekend, and it's an event that I think is going to. It's one of those that it's this military birthday parade that Donald Trump has orchestrated. He's hiding behind the Army's 250th birthday, which happens to coincide with his 79th birthday, and so he is essentially greenlit or encouraged the Army to throw itself a very expensive birthday party so that he can bask in the glory of the Army. There's a bit of irony there. If you've followed Donald Trump's career, this is a man who went out of his way to get as many deferments as he could during the Vietnam War. He wasn't alone, but this idea that he's presents himself as this tough guy that wouldn't be afraid of everything, that was not the way he behaved when he was in his teens and 20s, when he was doing whatever it took to get out of the war. And I will tell you, I've always been a bit skeptical of his story because he can never tell you a truthful reason for his deferment, which foot it is, or whatever it was that he did. And I think I've shared with you before. After my father died, I found an entire file folder with everything that was related to his deferments that he got at first, and then his lottery number that happened to be high enough that he was able to avoid having to go. And he was somebody, like many Americans, that didn't want to have to go. Didn't fully believe in the mission, and understandable on that he wasn't alone. But the dishonesty about whether you were trying to get out or not has always been, to me, a litmus test, right? It's a character test. And, any politician that says that they don't remember, I can just tell you they're full of S, right? I don't believe them. I think if you were that concerned, you knew every little detail, like my father did. Knew every little detail of what were the particulars there. And yet here he is hiding behind a military that he refused to serve in, hiding behind, and somehow he equates military school with somehow with military service. And while I think military schools have their place, and certainly have done a great job developing plenty of young men and women over the years, mostly men, military schools have been mostly on that, young boys. I don't think anybody would mistake it for West Point. But what's really, I think, long-term damaging about this event, and look, I want to get to the potential short-term problems with this event in a minute, but the long-term damage is the politicizing of the military. One of the hallmarks of the American military is how we've done a pretty good job trying to keep, there's plenty of politics, don't get me wrong, that takes place to become I've always said one-star generals earn it. Every other star is politics. So yes, there's politics involved sometimes when it comes to certain things at the Army, but basically the military is apolitical. And we've done a pretty good job over decades, no matter how polarized we are, to try to do our best to keep it that way, because it is the most egalitarian institution we have left in America, where you have a kid from urban America and a kid from rural America. Both may have grown up poor. One may have grown up rich. One may have grown up poor. They're in the same foxhole. They're doing the same. They're in the same boot camp. They're dealing with the same drills, and you get the same housing allowances, and you get the same access and things like that. It is, it was more egalitarian than American society as a whole. So here's this institution that we've done such a good job with to keep politics out of it, and Donald Trump continues to try to politicize the military. I mean, just go back to his commencement address at West Point, where he, I think, defaced the military by wearing a MAGA hat. You're the commander in chief. Behave like the commander in chief, not like a political hack. And in that moment, he was a political hack. He did it again the other day when he went to now the renamed base that is back to being Fort Bragg. And by the way, this whole, we're going down this road, right, where the right was really upset. They felt like the left was playing the culture police, and it was getting overly woke, and they went too far in renaming these bases away from Confederate generals, which I've never understood this obsession with celebrating a losing army, right? Why would anybody want to celebrate the losing side? But what did the Trump administration do? They didn't change the names back technically to what they were. What they did is that they found soldiers with the last name of Bragg that served in World War I or World War II or Korea, hopefully served with distinction. And they claimed that the bases were being renamed for them. So they got all their old Confederate names back, but the Pentagon can claim that these bases are technically being named for this soldier named Bragg who served in World War II versus what it really is supposed to, what they really are hoping to denote. But when he went there, they had some strict instructions to make sure that if there was any soldiers who politically were uncomfortable appearing with Donald Trump, that they be dismissed, essentially, not allowed to be the soldiers among them behind them. So the White House orchestrated a group of soldiers to look like sycophants behind him, which is, look, I understand why a commander went ahead and did that. You don't want to create an awkward situation with the commander in chief, but the fact that the commander in chief put that base in that situation where they had to somehow try to weed out those that may have disagreed, been uncomfortable serving, sitting there as he demeaned and politicized the military. And then so it became self-selecting. And so then he gets folks that happen to be supportive of him to laugh and boo with him and all of that stuff. And it was just, it's a terrible look. And, here we have the one last institution in America that is seen favorably on both sides of the aisle, seen favorably by the American public in general. And why any politician would want to erode that away is beyond me. But, Donald Trump makes a lot of decisions that are never in the best interest of the country and only in the best interest of his ego. And this is one of them, all for his 79th birthday party. Let's go through a few facts here, by the way. The Army, the price tag for this military parade is approximately $25 to $45 million. It's probably going to be more, but let's take the $45 million figure. That $45 million already includes budgeted $16 million to repair the streets of Washington, D.C. after these tanks roll through. Now, remember, first of all, why the Army is showcasing tanks. I just heard an alarming stat that the average lifespan of a tank in warfare between the Russians and the Ukrainians is something like 3.5 days. It is a complete waste of money to use tanks. Tank warfare is something that is pretty much obsolete. But because there's so many military contractors and that want to make money still making tanks, we somehow have talked ourselves into having them, and they look cool. And you want to have, if you want to have your toys, you could have them. But now we're going to have these tanks that we really don't need in conventional warfare anymore, since that's not really how we would ever fight a conventional war these days, because warfare is going to be more and more unconventional. Just look what the Ukrainians just recently did to the Russians. We need to be preparing for asymmetrical warfare, not World War II. And but instead, those tanks are going to be rolling through the streets of DC. A terrible look. We're going to make Washington, D.C. look like the Red Square. I mean, this is what they do at the Kremlin. This isn't what you do. This is not how a collection of presidents thought the American people ought to be, American military ought to behave. But by the way, $45 million for this parade is a conservative estimate. There were some estimates when Donald Trump in his first term was demanding this, that it could cost upwards of $100 million. But I'm going to take the $45 million figure, and I just want to share with you what $45 million in the government, what it could buy. According to HUD and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, that same amount of money could feed every homeless veteran in America, all 32,000 of them, for 5 months. It could provide Section 8 housing vouchers for over 4,500 families for an entire year. That money could cover Medicaid health care for nearly 6,000 adults or 15,000 kids. That amount of money could pay for 14 million school lunches. Ready for this one? That amount of money would fully fund DC's tuition assistance grant program, the very one the Trump administration wants to eliminate. So we can go to infrastructure. $45 million is what Nevada just received to upgrade 30 aging bridges. How about that? Dozens. You could fix dozens of structurally deficient bridges nationwide or repave hundreds of miles of local roads for the cost of Donald Trump's birthday party. But instead, It's a one-day spectacle. Um, that's going to shut down National Airport for hours, inconvenience hundreds of thousands of travelers. Washington, D.C.'s National Airport is a bit of a hub now. It's not Atlanta, but it is where if you travel from the Northeast to the South, you're likely, if you have to change planes, you're actually likely to change planes if you're flying American in D.C. before you change planes in Charlotte or in Atlanta if you're flying Delta. And if you're flying from a smaller southern city to somewhere in the Northeast, you're probably more likely changing planes in DC than you are Charlotte. So, but they're going to shut down the airport. They're going to shut down the city, inconvenience the city in a whole bunch of ways. And it is not for patriotism. This is not what a patriot would do. A patriot wouldn't behave this way. It's all for one man's ego. Um, and it's at a time when the last thing we ought to be doing is finding other ways to polarize Americans. And the long-term damage, if we start eroding, we start if we start feeding the notion that the military is more red than blue or more blue than red, whichever side of the aisle you're on, that's the beginning of the end of the republic. We've seen that when the military is believed to be on one side of the political aisle over the other, we don't call that country a democracy at all. And so that's the type of damage that he's doing. And then there's the short-term damage that could come along with this, the unpredictability. Already he's used, with his decision to introduce the military into the situation in Los Angeles, he's only escalated the tensions in LA rather than de-escalating the tensions. He's put the military in a terrible place again, where they're getting inserted into domestic politics, which was, we worked really hard as a country to not have our military do that. And yet that's what he's doing here. He made this terrible threat when he said, if there's any protesters during, this parade, they're going to be met with some sort of retaliation. Well, you know what that's going to do. More people are going to want to protest him now, not less. And who knows how he's going to react to that. But you know what it's not going to be doing? It's not going to be celebrating the Army. There's not going to be a joint moment where, we're putting the country over politics or the country over personality. It's just, and I know you can sit here and say I'm pearl clutch, and we do this, right? Donald Trump will break a norm and we'll go, oh my God, we're never going to get that back, and we probably won't. And then the next day the sun comes out, and the next day there's another controversy, and we move on with our merry way. But that's the thing, you don't get your, you don't get your virginity back. I hate to put it in those terms, but we're essentially, if the military loses its political virginity, we're gonna regret that moment. And the more politicized, and already, what Pete Hegseth is doing, he's having trouble leading the Pentagon simply because so many people are uncomfortable with the politicism, with how much he and Trump are trying to politicize it. So I do think the resistance inside the Pentagon is real, because there are a lot of professional members of the military who don't think this is the way it should be. I mean, we have our volunteer military is the envy of the world. And if we treat it like political prop like this, it's only going to make it harder to recruit. It's only going to lower the perception of the military in a way that does real damage to us when we may need the military to protect us. We're living in an unstable world, a world that sometimes our own dysfunctional politics is making them more unstable. And we're going to regret weakening ourselves like this. But make no mistake, this parade and what Donald Trump has been doing with the military over the last 2 weeks, it's making America weaker, not stronger. And that ought to be the way folks look at this. This is, some of you may dismiss this criticism of mine as some sort of partisan hit. This is just as wrong if a Democrat were doing this, just as wrong if any American president were doing this. It's wrong, pure and simple. It's wrong, and it's un-American, and it's unpatriotic.